Well, good evening and welcome back to another episode of Discovery Live Ask a Scientist from Fort Collins Museum of Discovery. My name is Ben Gondras and I'm the Dome Theater Manager at the museum. And it's my pleasure to get to host this program and to bring these amazing experts from right here in our own community to you in this format so you can ask them your burning science questions. So tonight we've got some really amazing experts that I'm going to bring on in just a moment. But before I do that, I did want to mention that we bring these programs to you through your support. And so if you enjoyed tonight's program and would like to support us in continuing to bring these programs to you, we do ask that you consider making a donation to the museum. If you're watching on Facebook, you should see a little donate button right below the video. You can click that at any time during the video. Or if you'd like to visit our website at fcmod.org/donate, you can make a donation of any amount there as well. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and bring on our experts for tonight. So tonight we have on some amazing sound ecologists, and we have with us Jacob from Colorado State University and Emma from the National Park Service. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks for having us, Ben.
Yeah. And just so everyone knows, if you do have any questions for these two, please leave them in the comments down below, and we will get some answers for you from these guys. So to start us off, why don't we just start with some brief introductions of each of you. If you could just tell us a little bit about what it is that you do, what you're an expert in, and kind of how you got there, got to be in that position. So Emma, do we want to start off with you?
Sure, sounds good.
Awesome.
Hey everyone, my name is Emma Brown and I work for the National Park Service, specifically for the Natural Sounds and Night Skies Division. And we're based here in Fort Collins, and what we do is help all parks across the country that have questions about noise or light or any of those related topics. And let's see, I've been working for that division for about 15 or 16 years, and I'm just excited to meet with you all today and hear what questions you might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Emma. We really, really appreciate it. And Jacob, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I am a research associate with the Sound and Light Ecology team at Colorado State University. I work closely with Emma in the efforts of the National Park Service to monitor, quantify noise pollution in national parks, look at the impacts of that noise on wildlife and visitors. So I'm largely running our research lab at Colorado State University. I have a team of anywhere from 5 to 12 undergraduate students who do most of the work. I just kind of look good doing it, guiding them. But aside from that, I also specialize in communication, outreach, education, and I do that by various means. And also I spend a lot of time in wilderness listening to really cool sounds, recording them, and then bringing them back to the general public for them to enjoy.
Excellent. Thank you so much again for both of you joining us here tonight. It sounds like you guys are doing some really amazing, interesting work that I can't wait to hear more about. And also, just once again, for anyone watching, if you do have questions for these two at any point during the program, just leave those in the comments below and we will get those answered. So let's start off, I guess, just with a really basic question. Could you give us a broad overview of what is soundscape ecology? What are we talking about when we say soundscape ecology?
So I'll jump in, Jacob, and then you should add anything that I've missed. But one of the really important ways that wildlife communicates is through sound, and whether that's searching for a mate, or establishing their territory, or looking for dinner, or in the case of prey, it might be listening for the sounds of predators that want to make them dinner. And so this really complex web of sounds that exist in a particular area defines the place. If you were to visit let's say a national park or a protected area and just take a few minutes to listen, each place is going to have a really different and unique sound. And so soundscape ecology is the way that all of those sounds come together to form a habitat for the wildlife that live there. And in the case of us humans, when we visit natural areas, it is how we experience the landscape around us.
Yeah, and I think to put that into a greater perspective, I think Emma did a great job describing soundscape ecology. It fits under the larger umbrella of really sensory ecology. So how organisms, sense the world around them with their different senses. And so soundscape ecology is just one of those that you can think about how many animals use their sense of smell, their sight, tactile, navigation through the world. And so we're really interested in understanding how organisms move through space and time and sounds, or soundscape ecology is one very important way of doing that. And humans are very much a part of that field of study and the sounds that contribute to how the world sound. And so we're very much a part of those studies that we do.
Excellent. Can you guys talk a little bit about some of the history behind the study of soundscape ecology? I understand maybe it's kind of a younger field as far as ecology is concerned. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say so. Certainly from the perspective of the National Park Service where I work, we didn't really have an office dedicated to this topic until 2000, actually. And the focus was actually in helping parks manage the sound of aircraft overflights, specifically air tours over national parks. And that's really where everything started for the National Park Service, but it has really bloomed into looking at all aspects of bioacoustics and, as Jacob mentioned, the effects of noise on wildlife and on the human experience. And so with that being said, the National Park Service is really one of the only land management agencies that has an office dedicated and a few people that are looking at these questions. And so we have the great fortune of working with some of our colleagues in other agencies like the Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management, who are just now starting to look into how changes in the acoustic environment might affect their land.
Very cool.
Yeah, and I think maybe we should have all backed up and paused for a moment and described exactly what a soundscape is. We talk about it.
Let's do that.
I think it puts all of what Emma says and what we will say into perspective. And so I think everybody's familiar with the term landscape. It's the sights that you see in front of you, and soundscape is very similar, except it's the sounds that you hear around you. And so a soundscape can be any combination, a number of sounds around you, depending on where you are in time and space on the globe. And so a soundscape in an urban area is very different than a soundscape in a suburban area, different than a soundscape in a rural area, protected parks, you name it, they each have their own unique soundscape. So that's what we're talking about. We're really talking about what places sound like. And this idea of soundscapes really didn't come around to the 1980s. And even after that, the idea that our sounds, our meaning humans, sounds could impact organisms both at a very short-term scale and a long-term scale was kind of unknown. And it slowly gathered steam. Emma mentioned the National Park Service entered the field in 2000. And since then, people across the world, scientists across the world have jumped into this field, and we've learned so much both in a terrestrial environment and in an aquatic environment. And even the aquatic environment, it's almost like rewinding back to 2000. That's how far behind we are on the curve in that sort of realm. And so it's still new. There's a lot to be learned. There's a lot that we have learned, and it's just really exciting to sort of investigate it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that was a great overview of what exactly a soundscape is. So thanks for bringing that up, Jacob. Excuse me. So I was reading a little bit about soundscape ecology, and I came across a quote from someone named Bernie Krause. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Bernie, but he's a soundscape ecologist as well. And he said, a picture may be worth 1,000 words, but a natural soundscape is worth 1,000 pictures. Can you guys talk a little bit about why he thinks there's so much richness in a soundscape that it can compare to 1,000 pictures of that same landscape, perhaps.
Emma, do you want that one? Or you want me to jump in?
I think you should go first.
All right. Well, think about a picture. I mean, a picture fundamentally is a snapshot in time of what a place looked like. When we talk about soundscapes, what we're really talking about are recordings of what the place sounds like. And a recording can last anywhere from, a millisecond to many hours, many days. And so I think possibly what Bernie meant was, that picture can mean a lot and tell you a lot and convey a lot of emotions. But if you listen to if you think about just the sun coming up and recording the sounds of a natural area during that 1 hour time period, half an hour before and after sunrise, and think about how that soundscape changes, evolves over time. You have rush hour coming and growing, and you've got the birds starting to sing into that dawn chorus. You may have frogs that were singing in the night that stopped singing partway into that, insects, and you name it. There are all kinds of things coming and going in that soundscape that really give you a picture, a mental picture, based on those sounds of what that place might look like, what it might feel like, and what it would be like to sit there and experience it. So I kind of feel like that's what he meant, although, those are Bernie's words.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better than Jacob did. The sound cues that go with your experience in a particular place add a whole nother dimension to what you are seeing and what you might be experiencing. And if you think about us as just another animal that has evolved, we have evolved to perceive very minor, very small changes in our environment through acoustic cues, through that sound. And so our ears are actually quite well tuned to experience a place. And, whether that's a natural experience or whether you're at a cultural site that's being preserved for a particular moment in time, that soundtrack that goes with your visual experience is really critical to experiencing a place. And I think one of the cool things about soundscape ecology and the work that Jacob and the National Park Service is doing right now is that it's something that seems really fundamental, but until you point it out to someone, they may not even realize that it's happening to them. So that's been a really fun part of this work, is just kind of alerting folks to that case.
I also think, giving another example of what maybe Bernie meant, think about anybody who's been to a wedding or has gotten married, think about a photo from that wedding. It can tell you a lot about what happened, who was there. But if you somehow had a recording, let's say an hour and a half recording of the ceremony plus part of the reception, just the audio, think about the picture that would paint as like what was going on, who was there, having fun. I mean, just the emotions that were associated with it. And I think it's just so much more powerful to sort of experience the world that way through your ears. And so, yeah, just another more relatable example, I think.
Yeah. Excellent. So you talked a little bit about sound recordings, but can you talk more in depth about what kinds of data you guys are gathering through this recording process, and are there other processes that you use to analyze a specific soundscape?
Yeah, we answer a couple of fundamental questions when we place sound monitoring equipment in natural areas. And one of those questions is, how loud is it? And so we have instruments that measure the sound level once a second, over 33 different measurements for a month at a time. So that ends up being a very large set of data. Another fundamental question that we answer is, who or what is making that sound? And many national parks where Jacob and I work are interested in knowing the relationship between how often human-caused sounds are heard and how often natural sounds are heard. And that interplay is really critical to understanding the health of a particular area, of a particular soundscape, let's say. So if you can sit for 20 minutes at a time and not hear a human-caused sound, you'll have a lot different experience than if you can sit for only 10 seconds without hearing a human-caused sound. And so a lot of what the National Park Service has been doing is developing this basically customized equipment that can run in all conditions, from Denali National Park in the winter to Death Valley in the summer, that can survive those weather extremes and also collect really high quality data. We also collect on the side some localized weather information, so how fast the wind is blowing and what the temperature and relative humidity are. And that is important because those two things affect how sound travels through a landscape. So once those data are collected and retrieved and brought back here to Fort Collins, then we send it over to Jacob.
Yeah, and me and my team of undergraduate researchers, we look at those questions that Emma mentioned. We look at how loud. So if you can imagine, we put our recorders, our microphones in a specific spot in Rocky Mountain National Park. Let's just say up on the tundra near the Alpine Visitor Center. We leave it there for 30 days, and we listen to a subset of those data. So 8 days, we're subsampling that even more, 10 seconds every 2 minutes. And we found that by listening to that amount of data, we are able to appropriately characterize and quantify noise pollution and different sound sources at those sites. And so my students are doing what Emma said. They're listening and they're documenting all the different sound sources. And by doing that at the times, we're creating a timeline of when those sounds occurred. We also know how loud they were, and it really paints a good picture of what that particular place or that particular park sounded like at that time. And I think another thing we do that's pretty cool, and this is pretty abstract, so I imagine when people hear some of this, it's still kind of hard to grasp how we do this. We're primarily visual creatures, so investigating through our ears is kind of new, but we're also able to go in and, like Emma mentioned, those 20-minute gaps in noise versus those 10-second gaps in noise. And by noise, I mean anthropogenic, human-caused or human-associated sounds. We can look at the relationship of different animals and their vocalizations in relationship to our noise, their presence, their patterns of interaction with those sounds. And so we can answer all kinds of questions. That way we can put microphones in place over time, and we can look at how ecosystems recover, at least acoustically, how we're able to determine the recover after disturbances like landslides or fire events, or you name it. We can go in and with our audio data, we can look at those types of questions.
Excellent. And Jacob, you just mentioned anthropogenic noise, and I wanted to, so my understanding is when you're studying these soundscapes, you're kind of categorizing sounds into three broad buckets, right? Geophony, biophony, and anthropophony. Can you guys talk a little bit about those categorizations and what each of them are?
Yeah. Well, Emma, correct me if I'm wrong, but I brought this point up at a workshop a few weeks ago, and someone mentioned that anthrophony or anthrophony isn't maybe not the correct term anymore. Is that true?
I think it just depends on who you talk to, but at its most basic, I think there are sounds that exist in the environment if humans weren't around. So sounds that would occur there, like the sound of wind moving through vegetation and the sound of water flowing and the sound of vocal wildlife, those things would exist whether or not we were around. And then there are sounds that we produce either through motorized vehicles or other activities, and that would fall into the second category. So I think that how you lump or split it really just depends on your particular perspective and the school of thought that you come out of. But I think at its very basic, when you break it down, there are either sounds of the environment or sounds that are human caused.
Yeah, and I'll take it one step further. Another way you can think about noise versus sound, the sounds we're talking about, especially with wildlife, are sort of intentional. Even with humans are talking right now. This is a sound we're making, and we have intentionality with it. Another way to think about noise is sort of the byproducts of us being there. And so the motors of vehicles, the clanking of everyday life. I mean, these aren't intentional communication efforts. It's just a byproduct of us being there. And so as you move throughout your day and you start to think about sounds, think about what's intentional, what's not intentional. How would your life be different if that unintentional noise was removed? And what would that open up to you and make available to you as you go about your walks through your natural areas or through your neighborhoods? And imagine what more intentional sound you could hear. I think that's just a fun way to think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So that brings up another question to mind. Why is it so important that we preserve these natural soundscapes? Why is it so important that we are aware of our unintentional noise in that manner?
Well, there are a lot of reasons. First and foremost, the ability to hear natural sounds is pretty rapidly decreasing as a result of our transportation networks expanding. So if you look at a map of where all the paved surfaces in the continental US are, it's massive, and it is increasing every day. And so, motorized vehicles travel along those transportation networks, and they're even traveling in the sky as well. The most recent publications that came out of our collaborative work with CSU and NPS have shown that high altitude commercial aircraft are among the most prevalent sounds in natural areas, and that is just because they proliferate. And it's been interesting to look at how specifically during the initial shutdown post-pandemic, how that traffic was greatly reduced over natural areas. But I would say the prevailing condition is that there are many flights over a given area every day, and if there aren't many flights, it's likely a set aside airspace for military activity, and then there are probably military aircraft over there too. It's just we don't see them in our mapping. So those are two reasons, just because it's becoming more of a rare experience, but also really interesting research is coming out about the positive health benefits of being exposed to natural sounds. And so the ability to reduce stress and even more serious health concerns like cardiac disease and cancers. Really, we benefit from the sounds of nature around us, and we may not realize how powerful that can be. The Park Service has recently, started an initiative called Healthy Parks, Healthy People, and this concept of using natural experience or walks in nature as a potential prescription is a really interesting one, and it's one that we're definitely keeping close tabs on.
And I think, we have a viewer question. I don't know how you want to handle those, Ben, but I think the question, and I can sum it up, fits in well with your question.
Yeah, I was going to say it's kind of related, so we can kind of just jump off that. But yeah,
if you
want to just take
I'll summarize it real quick. I mean, the question basically has two parts to it. And I can understand that the first part, where it can sound like when we refer to human sounds, it sounds like we're talking about things that are inherently negative. And we don't mean for that to be the case at all. I think when we're talking about the negative impacts, we're talking about what I mentioned was the noise, the unintentional side effects. And that's not always negative for some people. One person's noise is another person's sound. So someone who grew up in the city may be very comfortable listening to the din of city life rather than the quiet of wilderness. And so it's about perspective. And you can think about cultural sounds that come with human civilization. And those cultural sounds are partially protected by the National Park Service. And so those are what I would think are positive sounds, good sounds. They're not inherently negative. The second part of the question was, Um, Essentially, why do we think those sounds are necessarily impacting wildlife? What makes them special? And I think it's important to remember the evolutionary time scale of which species have adapted to their environments. If you think about the combustion engine, it's just over 100 years old, and that's one of the greatest contributors of noise across the planet. Aircraft, vehicles, construction, I mean, you name it, it's a big problem. And so we're talking about 120 years of the introduction of that sound into an environment that has evolved alongside these organisms for thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years. And so it's a new sort of a disturbance on a scale that doesn't allow, or what we're learning hasn't particularly allowed animals to adapt to. So it's happening really fast. And we know that it has negative impacts on communication, reproduction, habitat use, space use, all kinds of ecological services from species to communities that we're seeing. And it makes, at least from a theoretical perspective, it makes sense because it is a new disruptor that organisms and ecosystems haven't had a chance to evolve alongside with. So I think hopefully that answers the question and gets at your original question, Ben.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Jacob. Awesome. So speaking of, human caused noise and those types of things, especially through the lens of the National Park Service, I'm curious what kinds of management techniques are being put into place to deal with that issue in the parks specifically. Oh, Emma, you're muted.
It had to happen once.
It had to happen.
That's a great question, Ben. There are a variety of different approaches. Each national park is really pretty unique, and that's why they've been, set aside for current and future generations. But I think you can think about it in a few broad categories. So, the reduction of the effect of transportation on the soundscape can be approached in a couple of different ways. And that could be by moving as many visitors as possible in as few vehicles as possible. So many parks have adopted shuttle systems, not exclusively for the sound benefits, but that has certainly been an added benefit to the use of shuttle systems, getting people where they want to go with as few vehicles as possible. Several parks are looking at the use of quiet pavement on their park roads or on roads that are adjacent to national parks. And that's a pavement coating that is very porous and acts to trap some of the sound of the tire and pavement interface. And when I mentioned shuttles, another interesting outcome of the increase in electric vehicles may be a reduction in sound output as well for passenger vehicles as well as shuttle systems. And Zion National Park in particular, I know, is retrofitting their shuttle fleet right now and replacing propane-powered or natural gas-powered shuttle buses with electric buses, which have been shown to be much quieter. Wow. So there's those sorts of management actions. We should also acknowledge that the National Park Service, just in its operation, or any park management outfit, state, local, whatever, has some operational noise that is produced just through grounds care and transportation of staff from one place to another, HVAC units in visitor centers and that sort of thing. And so, adopting quieter grounds care vehicles, those that are electric, or opting to even use rakes instead of, gas-powered blowers, let's say, can greatly reduce the sound output of operations. Denali National Park recently retrofitted the backup beepers in a lot of their fleet vehicles. This is the boop, boop, boop sound that you hear every time, a snowplow backs up or what have you. And they replaced them with a different sound that is more of a whooshing sound, like zzz, has the same effect of notifying someone on the ground that there's a vehicle near them that's coming closer. But that sound has a different having different aspect to it, doesn't travel as far and have as large of a footprint on the landscape. So it might not be audible in a sensitive area like a campground nearby. So those are some examples. There's also some really interesting research that's come out of Muir Woods National Monument just north of San Francisco, which sees incredible amounts of visitation because of its proximity to that major city center. And what's really unique about this place is that there are these towering redwoods with super thick bark, and all the dust that falls onto the forest floor is really absorptive and has this really hushing effect. And so when you enter this place and these tall trees are all around you, you feel as if you're in a place of introspection, and it's cathedral-like. And so there is actually an area in that park called Cathedral Grove, and in this particular place, the park set out signs that encourage visitors to turn their cell phones off, speak in quieter tones, and really appreciate the sound around them, and allow other visitors to do the same. And several graduate students and labs have looked at the effects of that on the overall sound levels in that area, and also wildlife response and visitor assessment of their visits. And it has been shown just this simple sign encouraging people to be aware has greatly reduced noise levels in that area, and the wildlife responded by being more vocal, and people responded by saying they enjoyed their visit more because they could hear these wildlife sounds on top of the visual, the impressive experience of being in a redwood grove. So I could just go on forever and ever in mitigation ideas. But I'll turn it over to Jacob to see if he has anything to add, and then I could keep going.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to put our audience as players in that equation. And so if you think about, a lot of us go to national parks to see pretty things and maybe see wildlife, but if you really start to make a concerted effort to, when you get to a park, think about the sounds, make it part of that visit as well. I want to hear the elk bugling in Rocky Mountain National Park. I want to hear the waterfalls roaring through the mountains or canyons, or I want to hear the dawn chorus in the temperate woodlands of Kentucky at Mammoth Cave. I mean, there are all sorts of soundscapes, sound marks that you should be excited to, and probably are excited to experience. You're just not aware of it. And part of that is just thinking of sound as something cool to experience. And so when you go there, having those noise sources detract from that experience can be very problematic. Is not quite the right word, but it can take you out of the moment. It can really detract from your experience. And so you have an option as well. I mean, our parks are our parks in this country. We are all taxpayers, and you can also write the parks. You can talk to park staff and say, hey, I really enjoyed these sounds. I think maybe if we did something about this particular noise source, it would allow people to enjoy this even more. So if there are ideas that you have, bring them up to the staff at the parks. And because that's how we become, or how Emma's group partly becomes alerted to noise problems in the parks. And so we can go to work on addressing those. Well, first quantifying them, and then with the help of our work, the parks can address those sound sources or noise sources.
Yeah, I think I've had a couple of really amazing natural sound experiences myself, and the elk in Rocky Mountain National Park was definitely one of them. I got to camp there a couple of falls ago, and just falling asleep to them bugling in the distance was, oh man, it was magical. And then the second one that I can think of is actually going to Nebraska to see the crane migration, and getting up early in the morning, going out, and then seeing the birds lifting off the river and just hearing the cacophony of noise that they made was just like anything else. It was like nothing else that I've ever experienced in my life. And yeah, I think that experience will stick with me for the rest of my life. So
Yeah, and I would challenge your viewers to stop and think about if they've experienced those things you mentioned or other similar, equally impactful things. Think about traveling to Rocky Mountain National Park, pulling up, seeing this massive herd of elk battling in the fall, antlers, just beautiful fall colors, no sound. Or
it wouldn't be the same.
super high amounts of noise pollution that sort of drowns that out. And ask yourself, is that a better world? I mean, we're not like at that level, the existential threat, but like it could be if we weren't putting the effort out there to make this a quieter world, to understand ways to improve it. We could have people going to parks and having that sort of experience sort of impacted in a way that's very negative. So I think that's a fun little activity or a scary little activity people can just think about to understand that impact.
Yeah. Well, speaking of memories and sound experiences, I'm sure you guys have a favorite experience of your own. So do you want to just tell us about maybe a favorite experience or a favorite time that you were out in the field? Yeah, just give us some stories, I guess.
The good stuff. Emma, you want to go first? Or?
I'll go first because like yours are gonna knock mine out of the park. But one of my favorite natural sounds is the Hawaiian petrel, and this is an endangered species. I think they're federally listed, and there's really very few nesting pairs. But we recorded the sounds of them in Haleakala Crater, and this is a really interesting species because they roost way up there in the crater, and then in the evening they leave the roost and fly down to the water's edge to forage. And it's just a haunting sound, and they're this amazing creature. And to hear them calling in the silence of the crater, one of the things that makes that place so unique from an acoustic perspective is that there's a bunch of pumice, at the ground level of the crater as a result of the volcanic activity. And pumice, if you've ever picked it up, is really, really light as a rock because there's lots of holes in it. And so the sound gets trapped in all of those holes, and it makes that place naturally incredibly quiet. And then to layer on top of that the sound of this kind of rare and persistent little creature was really it marked a moment in time for me. And I just think they have a really great sound. And there's all kinds of wildlife species out there that have sounds that can give you great joy, I think. I mean, I was thinking about Ben's experience in Rocky, hearing the elk. If you didn't know what was going on or who was making that sound, you would be so perplexed, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
I'm scared. Maybe.
A little bit, maybe.
It happens throughout the night.
Yeah.
That's interesting, Emma. I've never really thought about the pumice and how it would impact sound transmission. And yeah, now I've got a new thing I have to go listen to. That's cool. I could talk about this question for days. I won't. We're limited in time. I'll just mention a quick few. I mean, building on what Ben said with the elk rut, I've gone to Rocky almost every year for the last 4 or 5 years to listen and record the sounds of the elk rut for the park, for people to listen to. And this last year was very different. I think like all of us, I was eager to get outside and get out of the house. And so I spent 3 days living amongst the elk herd at Rocky Mountain National Park. And I'll preface all of this with, I have permits from the park to do this. And regardless of what I'm getting ready to say, you are required by the park to stay 25 yards away from these potentially dangerous animals. So I started off the morning, my second morning, at least 500 yards away from these animals. And I climbed inside like a tangle of brush and trees that had fallen. And I placed my microphones out on the edge of this field. And over the course of an hour, they worked their way towards me, getting closer and closer. And as a sound recordist, field recordist, there's like this ethical question of, when you have something going on, do you disrupt this for any reason, for your safety? And I have a really hard time. Well, let's just say I let them work their way towards me, and they got closer than 25 yards, and I figured I was tucked away very safely in these logs, and I didn't want to disrupt this like magical moment. And it was insane, the sounds. I could feel the vibrations of these bulls as they were calling to each other and battling. So that's one thing. I spent 8 days paddling the Boundary Waters canoe area wilderness in northern Minnesota by myself, and every day listening to the loons, either day or night, calling from my camp while I'm on the water. Just this haunting, quintessential sound of wilderness is just something that I love. And finally, working in Yellowstone in the winter a couple of years back, in complete blackness of winter, hiking into a place where I was hoping to record wolves, I all of a sudden heard footprints around me in the snow in the darkness. So I dropped to the ground, hit play on my microphone, my recorder, and I just listened to these animals. I'm not sure what they were at the time. I wasn't sure what they were at the time. I could hear their footprints very close, but it's pitch black out. And all of a sudden this chorus of coyotes rang all around me for about 4 or 5 minutes. And they couldn't have been more than 25 yards away at the time. So just like all these memories outweigh anything I've seen in parks by far.
Wow. Yeah, those are some great stories. And I could probably sit here all day and listen to them, but that's awesome. So we've got an audience question that just came in. And this person would like to know, what are some ways people could train themselves to start noticing and listening to soundscapes if they don't have access to a place like a national park?
Emma, do you?
Yeah, a national park is not required. Really, your backyard or your neighborhood green space would certainly do the trick. And another thing that one can do to learn more about soundscapes and experience soundscapes, beyond what we can reach from a day's walk, would be to check out some of the resources that the National Park Service has in our sound library of unique sounds that have been recorded during our measurement efforts. But even more than that, you should check out some of the work that Jacob is doing to bring together recordings from national parks across the world, and also some of the guided tours, the guided acoustic tours that Jacob has done. So I'll turn it over to him and let him give us more details on that.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. The first thing to train yourself to hear the world better is just to listen better and want to hear better. And so that can start in your house. You can be cognizant, just sit there in your house and think about all the sounds you hear. I mean, the refrigerator running, the humming of that engine, the sound of a fan whirling overhead, your dishwasher, all the sounds of your house. Start there. Your footprints on the floor, how hard you walk on the ground, the difference between walking barefoot and socks. I mean, these are little things you can do at home. It can start to train you. And then when you get outside, wherever it is, try to pinpoint things that you like and don't like about the sounds around you. That's going to differ for everybody, but what it's doing is it's just teaching you to listen. One of the things, the unfortunate side effects of taking this position is I now hear every source of sound pollution that exists around me, including every aircraft that flies above us, every motorcycle that drives by. I can't unhear these things. And so a word of warning, once you start listening, you can't unhear anything. And so for those of you that can't get outside, that can't travel because of physical disabilities, because of financial incapability, you have a job, your time constraints. I mean, I have all kinds of resources. The National Park Service has resources where you can sit and listen to the sounds of our parks. I think Ben just shared some things in the chat. This is my personal recording page. I travel to protected places around the country and really hemisphere and bring those sounds back for you to enjoy. Scientific American and I have partnered up to release a new podcast called National Park Nature Walks. It just released 2 weeks ago. They have 3 more weeks of new episodes, and it's essentially a guided walking tour through national parks with me, some talking every now and then about the sounds that you are hearing. So it empowers you to take sort of ownership of your experiences in the parks. And I promise you, once you listen and once you learn what's making those sounds, your experience in the outdoors just becomes infinitely richer. It's an incredible transformation that I just can't imagine that I used to live without.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks for mentioning those resources. I'm definitely gonna delve into some of those myself. I'm really excited about that podcast series. So, yeah. So we've got another interesting audience question here, and this person would like to know: are there any sounds? I might rephrase it a little bit, but are there any sounds that you guys have difficulty identifying what the source is, whether it's wildlife or other types of sounds? And what do you do when you come across something like that?
Emma?
Definitely. Yes, Dixie, there are lots of sounds that we can identify, and that may be because they're really far away, and so they're very faint, and then we can only hear, small parts of them. Or it may be that it's just a really unfamiliar sound and it's never been identified. There's one particular sound that we recorded in Yosemite National Park in early 2000s that was this haunting sound. The best way I can describe it is that it sounded like Bigfoot, and and it happened in the middle of the night, and we were completely perplexed at what the source was. So we sent it around to some of the park biologists who are just familiar with that area and may have spent some more time than folks like us from Fort Collins, and they sent it to their colleagues. And through that consensus, through that discussion, we arrived at the likely outcome that it was probably a bear that had recently grown up and left its mother and was basically calling out for someone feeling lonely. And so that's one of the ways that we answer some of these mystery questions. We share it with other people who are familiar with the most likely source. I can think of also underwater recordings. That's pretty much, there are so many sounds that occur underwater in freshwater and marine environments that we have no idea of the source yet. I would say comparatively less work has been done in identifying underwater sounds than terrestrial sounds, like those sounds that happen above water on land. And so I think that's a really promising area of development in the future. There are specific marine species like whales that people are doing a ton of research on to help with conservation efforts. But lots of fish produce sounds, and if we stuck a hydrophone, so a microphone that can measure sound underwater or record sound underwater, if we stuck a hydrophone, in a nearby lake, we would probably hear tons of sounds that we would be completely perplexed by.
And the nature of our work, to sort of let you guys understand or imagine what we're doing, is I'm sitting there, or my students are sitting there with headphones on, listening to sounds with no active picture or video of the site and what's happening. I mean, we can paint a picture of sound, so a spectrogram. It's a visual representation of sound that can sort of help us, but most of the time we are trained guessing for a lot of things, and I think this is something that goes back to the question about training yourself to listen. We take information about the site that helps us make educated guesses. Where are we on the planet, latitude and longitude, what elevation, what time of year, what time of day, what kind of habitat are we in? These all help build our expectation of things that we are going to hear, and help us identify those unidentifiable sounds. And this is something, again, when you're out paying attention to the sounds around you, start associating them with the time of day, the time of year, the type of habitat you're in. Are you in a forest? Are you in a field? Are you in a wetland? And I'm sure most of you already do this, but don't actively think about it. You know when you hear birds most often in the morning, what time of year in the spring and summer. You know when, at least from the Midwest, I know when I hear thunderstorms more often. They're later in the day into the night is when they happen for us. And so all kinds of things that are associated with certain places and times of days. And so these are things we do to help, but sometimes we just can't figure it out, and we just chalk it up to a big O unknown.
That's awesome. So speaking of people just getting out and observing the soundscapes around them in their neighborhoods and their backyards, are there any citizen science projects that people can get involved in around soundscapes? Do you guys know of anything?
Emma, do you?
Well, I was thinking about the Sounds of Your Park project, but that is more focused on natural sounds recordist. But I think there are, I don't have a link right now, but I do think there are apps that you can record interesting sounds on your mobile device and then upload tagged with a particular location, and similarly explore, sounds that have been recorded across the world somewhere by another sound enthusiast.
Yeah, sorry, I just that was kind of out of the blue, but it's something that I always like to ask different people. How can people get involved in this, and how can people really contribute to this field of study in their own ways?
Yeah, well, maybe to help what Emma was talking about, there's a group of scientists at Purdue University. They've developed an app, and it's called Record the Earth. It's available on the Google Play Store, the Apple Store. You can download it, and it treats your phone as a microphone, and it allows you to record the sounds around you and submit it to their global map of sounds. So they're trying to understand what the world sounds like. So that's something anybody can contribute to, and it does help. Emma mentioned the Sounds of Your Park initiative, which I'm leading up with different agencies, the Park Service, Parks Canada, the George Wright Society, IUCN. We have a website, soundsofyourpark.com, where it's a global sound map. You can go, again, you can listen to the sounds of protected places around the world, which is, again, cool if you can't travel to those places. But also it allows people who have slightly better recording equipment than a cell phone. We're asking for decent quality recordings, and if you're interested in submitting your recordings from protected areas around the world, we put them on the map. And again, it allows us to engage a bigger audience. It allows people to become aware of these protected areas. And really the central thesis of my work for my career is, once you connect people to the outdoors, you have conservation advocates for life, really. And so I think it does a really good job of doing that. There are probably bird monitoring programs around the country. I don't know about in Colorado or Fort Collins that use sounds to either do in-person counts of birds living in areas or through acoustic recorders. But I don't know of any off the top of my head, but you could probably Google that.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, I think those are some great resources. So thanks for telling us about those. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left in our time. I can't believe it's been almost an hour. It's been so much fun talking to you guys about this. But I do have another question for you guys. And this question is, if a tree falls in the forest and you aren't there to record it, did it really happen?
I mean, from like a physics standpoint, or so I'll go back to our first question actually, because this is kind of a fun question to answer, intentional or not. They mentioned, sound is nothing but a vibration of particles in the air, so sure. Sound waves. And if there isn't a receiver, so an ear or some sort of membrane to capture that vibration, I mean, I don't think there actually was. I mean, the event could have happened, but did it make it sound? Yeah, if you can't measure it, that's a tough question. But I think deep down inside, the answer is yes, but without a receiver, it doesn't matter.
There you go. There's an answer. Anything to add to that, Emma?
Just that, it has happened several times that the students at Jacob's Listening Lab have captured, in their data analysis, the sound of falling trees. And it kind of answers that age-old question that if our acoustic recorders are present at the site, then it will be captured and documented by the Listening Lab. But yeah, we capture all kinds of incidental sounds of nature, and that's one of the really exciting parts of our work is that we have a pretty good sense of the sounds that we're going to capture, but we get surprised all the time by wildlife activity or hydrologic or geologic, sound of rock fall or flooding or glaciers surging, and these things happen in natural areas. But if we don't happen to be there in person, we sometimes get lucky enough to have a recording that happened to be running during the time. So yeah, that's the kind of treasure hunt part of the work that we do.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, it sounds super fun. And I'm very jealous, actually. I might have to get involved in that Sounds of Your Park project, perhaps. Well, we've got just a couple of minutes left. Do you guys have any other closing thoughts about soundscape ecology or the work that you're doing, or what people can do to appreciate or protect the soundscapes around them?
Emma, did you want to go?
I was going to say that the museum actually has a fantastic sound exhibit that shows you the basics of sound and how sound travels and what sound is composed of. And I would say definitely start there. My family and I are members of the museum, and I just have always been stunned, partially because of the work that I do, at how great that exhibit is. And I just want to give kudos to you guys for setting that up.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I think, going back to the focus of our work is trying to create those park experiences, make sure they're as wild as possible, so they're as natural as possible. And part of that is up to you all, and that's within the parks, outside the parks. Think about your impact on the soundscape around you. Think about, like Emma said, and I know the convenience of life is wonderful, but convenience often comes with a lot of noise. And so think about ways you can cut the noise out of your life, even if it is a little inconvenient. Think about your impact. And, when I started listening to the world, I started to realize my own impact. And then I started to think about it from the perspective of people around me and what impact I'm having on them. And it's not always just about how it impacts us. It's also about how it impacts other people around us. And so if you can leave the world a quieter place than you found it, I think that is a wonderful goal, and that is achievable every day by every one of us.
Awesome.
Yeah. One of the cool things about sound is that, we also think about light pollution as well, but it's relatively easy to fix the problem if you turn the engine off, or if you turn off the thing that's generating the noise, or if you, choose to speak in a hushed tone. Like, the impact you have is immediate. You don't have to wait for the parts per million of a water pollutant to dilute over time. And so what's really satisfying about noise mitigation in particular is that you can see results right away.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, once again, it's been so much fun just chatting with you guys about soundscape ecology and learning about the work that you're doing. I hope you guys had fun, and I hope everyone out there watching learned a lot. So yeah, thank you guys so much for joining me, and I hope to see both of you around here again sometime soon. I'm sure you have lots more stories to tell us, so thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us, and thanks for the questions, everybody.
Yep.
Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye. All right, and for everyone out there watching, thank you so much for joining us. And like Jacob said, thank you for your amazing questions. Once again, if you did enjoy tonight's program, and would like to support the museum so we can continue to bring programs like this to you, we ask that you consider making a donation to the museum. The museum is a nonprofit organization, and all donations are tax deductible. If you're on Facebook, you can do that by clicking the little button down below the video there, or you can visit our website at fcmod.org/donate to do that. So thank you so much again for joining us, and we will see you again next week for a night skies update, and then in 2 weeks for another Discovery Live. We'll see y'all later.